Welcome students to our dialogue with Mary Tracy Sigmund, who is a Dharma teacher for Risho Kosei Buddhism here in Fort Myers. They are currently not hosting in-person services, but Zoom services right now, meditation services, etc. Welcome, Mary. Thank you for being with us. It's been great to have you in my class before, and I know this will be a great dialogue. And what would you begin with?
Sure. When we start a service, we call this our Odaimoku, which you can kind of think of as our mantra. And what we're going to be saying are the words on the front of my sash, which say, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, which means we put our trust, our faith in the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. We'll talk about that a little later, but this is how we do it. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo.
Thank you, Mary. I would love for you to share with the class how your spiritual journey that led you into Buddhism.
Okay.
And that personal side of it is always good to understand.
Sure. I was raised Roman Catholic, baptized Catholic as a baby, and which is why my name is Mary Tracy, because when I was baptized, at that time you had to have a saint's name. And my parents were this sort of forward-looking, and they wanted me to be Tracy, but they could not baptize me Tracy, so I am Mary Tracy in the Catholic tradition. And I practiced that for many years through my teenage years, and it was in my teenage years that I started questioning my faith a little bit. Like many adolescents, fell out of the faith a little bit, and then had a sort of a resurgence of it in my early 20s, where I kind of got back into it, and then it just kind of all fell apart. It just didn't make sense. I was turned off with what the Catholic Church was doing, still am in some ways, but I'm much more compassionate about it now. But I left religion pretty much altogether for a good 10 years, and then I kind of fell back into religion through taking yoga, doing some Tai Chi, reading about Eastern thought and philosophy, and that resonated with me. And I kind of drifted toward Buddhism, but I hadn't found a place that I wanted to go to practice. And again, they always say the teacher will come when the student is ready, and I just happened to have found the center that I found like 5 minutes from my home in Illinois at that time, and it became my spiritual home.
And it happened to be a
Risho Kosei. It's a Buddhist. It's still there. It's like a small home, but it's now their service, their house of worship, and they just welcomed me and guided me and taught me, and from them I was able to take additional courses and training and so forth, and finally went to training in different centers in the United States. I'd say that was the first part of my advanced training, where I learned more about the Lotus Sutra in small groups of other members, and that took a 2-year process, and then was eventually sent to Japan, and that was a 2-year process. We stayed for 2 weeks each time for 2 years, and stayed with families, and went to headquarters in Risho Kosei in Tokyo, and visited different centers in Japan, and became a Dharma teacher from that training.
And Dharma means?
Dharma is the teaching. The teaching of what Buddha's taught us is the Dharma.
Okay.
It could also be called the truth.
Okay, great. Now I put up a display of the branches of Buddhism, and I'm not sure it's from some textbooks, so I'm hoping it's fairly accurate. And I think
Yeah.
Risho Kosekai is a part of a Nichiren,
Correct. Right.
and all of these are the Mahayana school,
Right.
or branch, which is the large wheel, or the we're in this together kind of understanding. Theravada is the
That's the more traditional. That's the oldest branch.
and more individualist. This is more in like Thailand and Laos.
Correct. And that's
And
definitely
that's,
monks and nuns.
right.
Yeah.
And I remember I've been to Thailand, and I remember seeing this version. I think this is the only version I saw. And then
Vajrayana
is Tibetan. And this, I'm not
not
sure.
very
Yeah, it's kind of like I somehow connected between the two, kind of a hybrid. But this is the diamond vehicle, is that it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when Buddha taught, of course, he was born in India, and then after he passed, his disciples traveled through India, and then they eventually went out of India.
Yeah.
So that's when they went to Southeast Asia, and the Theravadan tradition came. When they went north up into Tibet, the Vajrayana, and then when they went to China
and
Korea,
Japan.
and then eventually Japan, the Mahayana developed.
Okay. And what I remember, one Risho Kosekai tends to or focuses on the standing Buddha rather than the lotus position or Buddha because of the teaching and serving in this position. Is that correct?
Right. The Mahayana tradition, and especially the Nichiren portion of that, stresses what we call the Bodhisattva way. And that means that our practice, we don't want liberation solely for ourselves or enlightenment just for ourselves. We want others to be enlightened as much as us and even before us. So our Buddha is standing because we're walking, we're out in the world, and we're practicing and helping and serving. Meditation is one of our practices, but I would say it's not the primary practice, where it's say Zen and other forms. Long periods of seated meditation would be their practice. Ours is more out in the world. So it's a modern form of Buddhism.
Okay. And right now, we are filming this during mid-July here in Southwest Florida, and we're going through both the COVID-19 upsurge of infections statewide and nationally, a lot happening around the world that way, and then a lot of social and racial unrest in the United States, and a lot of change going on. I'm just wondering how that fits in with, what are you hoping for during this time at this point in our culture with all of this going on? I can see Risho Kosekai saying, hey, we need to be out there, and this is what we would be promoting.
Right, that's exactly true. And I think one of our mottos is cherish every encounter or every moment. So this moment, as difficult and confusing as it is, I'm trying to cherish it, because I'm trying to see that all of this will be an opportunity for us to grow, do better, and I truly believe it's going to bring us all together. Right now our world seems very divisive, but I think ultimately we're going to come back together, and we're going to be stronger and better. So I think sometimes we get these moments of trial and tribulation, but when you look back in time, afterwards you see that these moments of trial and tribulation have been actually gifts, because we grow and we serve and we learn from these moments. So they're actually blessings, as hard as it is to.
So I don't know, the Eightfold Path
Yes.
is, if that is it's basically the way to enlightenment, but it is also the practice of being more enlightened. Is that, would you say? Or this is what you would hope everyone grows into in our society right now,
Right, and
correct?
I don't. It's not terribly different than many of the practices of other faiths. I mean, really. I mean, it looks a lot like the Ten Commandments and other things in some ways. But I mean, it's a way of practicing our behavior, our life, and that by following these guidelines, we will find that our lives will get better. So, again, the Buddha, we don't look at the Buddha as a god. He was a human being. So we don't, when we have our image of the standing Buddha or even the seated Buddha, that was a human being. He actually lived. And so what he taught us is that I'm a human being. I followed these principles and other things, and I found it worked. And if you want to try it, see if it works for you, and see if it doesn't make your life better.
Can you kind of lead us around each of these?
Sure.
Just to explain a little more for them. Now, they will have watched the PBS documentary, The Buddha.
Oh, that's good.
I think it's a good
It's great.
whole life story, lots of, so they'll watch part 1 and 2, or there are 3 parts, I don't remember. It's long, it's about 90 minutes.
I saw it in one whole.
Yeah. But they will have learned those things, but it's just one take. It's not necessarily getting into some of the aspects. So they'll know the
Right.
Four Noble Truths and how he learned those, more or less.
Okay.
And the Four Sights. Isn't it called the Four Sights? Or the where he saw a sick man, an old man.
Oh, when he went
dying,
out, when he left
yeah,
the palace.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He became, Shakyamuni Buddha when he was in the palace, because he was a prince. He had all of the trappings and wealth that anyone at that time, especially in India, could have. And his father had him groomed to be
kind of protected him.
the king, and he had him in that palace, and he never left. But as he got older, as those of us when we get older want to do, we want to go searching, and he left the palace, and that was the first time he saw people sick, people dying, people hungry, people in need, and this shocked him.
Yeah.
And so he went back to the palace, but eventually did leave completely because he needed to find out more about what was going on out there.
So they'll have kind of heard the story, and I think that PBS documentary does a good job of it.
It does, yeah.
But I don't think the Eightfold Path is really enunciated fully in that documentary.
No, and I think, let's say we start with right understanding, and that's kind of getting your head, your mind, in the right place. So again, let's say your mind should be, as we said, cherishing every encounter. Mm-hmm. If you can accept that, if you can get your mind in that place, then it's kind of like your starting point.
Yeah.
Then if you've got right intention, let's say anything we do, we always say it's the intention that's really the most important, because before we even do it, it's what do you intend that action to be? So
it's the why you're doing
Right.
it, the motivation.
Right. So make sure, if you can, that's why Buddhism wants you to kind of pause and reflect before you do something, especially something really significant. What is your intention here? What is your motivation? So make sure it's good before you proceed. Then right speech seems pretty obvious, but it's also quite complicated. And of these, it's one of the most difficult. And some people like to tackle one of these and then go to another one. And we always say, don't start with right speech.
Because you'll never get out of it.
It's so hard. I mean, it includes gossiping and
Sarcasm.
yes, all the things. I mean, we know we're not supposed to say these things, but sometimes they're just so
And
juicy.
things like using words as power against people. Is that, or like we've talked in the racialized society we have, microaggressions even. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but it's the, oh, so where are you from? You know, which is more or less a way to put somebody down as if they don't belong here, type of thing. So it's not just saying foul words or mean words, but it can be demeaning words, sometimes not even fully aware that you're doing it because you're playing a power game with them. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think, and that's where sometimes these kind of overlap. Because you've got, if you have that mindset of harmony and goodness, you're not going to want to jump into bad speech.
Right.
Right action. I'd say that's sort of just doing the right thing.
And doing good things.
Yeah.
Taking opportunities to help others, serve others.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Right living.
Right living. In Buddhist time, it was a little more complicated because they were sort of steering people away from, let's say, professions that were like butchers and even fishermen, things that killed life. So now we're a little more lenient in that regard. But again, whatever your life work is, it should be wholesome. So things like prostitution and gambling and those kinds of things would not be right livelihood. Right effort, that's sort of like diligence. I mean, I think as you get on this
Faithfulness,
path,
steadfastness,
you want to
grit.
quit.
Yeah.
You want to let it go.
So you don't let up.
Right.
You keep going. Right attentiveness. Is that
I'm trying to think what exactly that's.
being aware of your surroundings, or is that
Yeah, and again, I think
being present?
exactly
At
that's
the
what.
moment?
Yes, yeah, because we tend to get distracted. So.
We tend to think about what's coming next and what's going to happen tomorrow and what happened yesterday, and we get stuck in the past or the future, which aren't really even here.
Exactly.
Okay. And right concentration.
Right concentration. That's the part where we would, what most people consider the meditation. So that's where you can sit and focus on one thing calmly. So.
Good. Now, you mentioned the Lotus Sutra,
Correct.
which is the main text, sacred text that you have. Tell us how that fits into both the life of Buddha and how it fits in with other Buddhist texts. And then what you, if you could share some from it that you really find very meaningful, I think would be good.
This is the newest translation. It just came out last year. They updated the language a little bit. But
So was it in Chinese at first, or was it in Sanskrit before?
It was in Pali and Sanskrit. And then a scholar from, his name was Kumajariva. He was from China, but his mother was Indian. So he learned the Indian, Pali, and Sanskrit languages as well as Chinese. And as a scholar, he was sent to India to learn about their scripture. And that's when he encountered the Chinese script, but he was able to interpret it and then translate it back into, or he could see the Pali script in India and could translate it back into Chinese. So then when it came from China into Japan and so on, they kept using the Chinese script. But anytime you see the word sutra, that means teaching. And Buddha taught for 40-some years, and he traveled on foot all over India. And so he taught for a long time.
So did he write these things down, or did his disciples write them down, or was it oral tradition and then finally written down?
It was all oral in his time. And it was the tradition of that time that there had to be, and there still are actually, these people who have superb memories. One of his disciples, Ananda, had this superb memory. He memorized all of the teachings. So it was after Buddha passed away, about, I think 300 years after he passed away, they had a council and they sat down, and that's when they began to write
down
and keep in writing all of the teachings. But the Lotus Sutra is one of his later teachings. So the Heart Sutra is a very popular one that you may have heard of. That's much shorter, but very hard to understand. They're all kind of hard to understand. The Diamond Sutra.
Do they tend to, does his teaching, like if you could share some, maybe that would be helpful, but is it more like parabolic or metaphorical, or is it
All of that.
And kind of like proverbial, like they will have read some later on after this, when we get to Lao Tzu and Taoism, they'll read some of the Tao Te Ching, which is very like enigmatic in a sense.
And it's short.
And yeah, that's
there's a
very
lot
short.
in.
But you're kind of like, okay, so what is he trying to get at with this? Because it seems like it's just water is like this, but it's really about much more than that.
And I would love to see this sutra at some point, say, dramatized or videoed or something, because it's very dramatic. But it's got the metaphor, it's got parables, it's supposed to include the entire universe. So it's got dragons and all of these mystical creatures, kings, people, human, non-human. Everybody's included in this sutra. But as you can see, it's quite long, and it's almost very hard to understand on your own. And it will go from prose into poetry. The poetry was probably the part that most people could memorize the easiest. And they kind of just reiterate one another, but they also have little slight differences too, so you really do need to read both of them. But let's say, I'm just going...
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have favorite
I'm just
passages.
picking apart here.
Yeah.
He says, at that time, a bodhisattva named Wondrous Light was there with 800 disciples. When the Buddha, light of the sun and the moon, came out of samadhi, because the bodhisattva Wondrous Light was there, he taught a great vehicle sutra called the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma, a teaching that instructs bodhisattvas and that Buddhas protect and keep in mind. So you can see we've got bodhisattvas. And
so there's more. When I was in Japan, I went to a couple temples that had like 10,000 statues or Buddhas or Bodhi. And so the understanding is that anyone can become a Buddha?
Right, and that's actually something that's specifically mentioned in the Lotus Sutra, being one of the last of his teachings. The Buddha started out with the Four Noble Truths, which gave people that if you follow those Four Noble Truths and follow the Eightfold Path, you would achieve nirvana. But that would be nirvana for you, yourself.
Right.
And then as he continued teaching later, he taught what we call the 12 causes and conditions. So that's, again, everything that happens to us happens because of a cause and a condition. Things just don't happen willy-nilly. We're born because our parents gave birth to us, and our parents gave birth to them. And I was caused to be here because you called me, and you knew me from a previous encounter.
Right.
So all of these things are related. So that would be another form of, say, enlightenment. But then the last teaching was everyone can become enlightened, and everyone shares inherently the nature of a Buddha and all living beings. Okay. So we're all capable of enlightenment, of Buddhahood.
Okay, great. Now, one of the debates that I've had in the class is whether Buddhism is a religion or a philosophy. just kind of for fun, because it's kind of both. And
yeah, it is. But I think if you follow it as I do, as a religious practice, not just as a study,
philosophical study,
then it's a religion.
Because you've devoted yourself to its teachings.
Yeah, it's your ethics and everything is involved.
Right. So it becomes part of your internal identity and what you're about and how you frame the world, etc.
Right.
So it takes on more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a philosophy for some people, and I think if you're just a student and you read about it and you're curious about it,
it's more or less, but it's kind of like being a fan on the side watching the players on the field.
Right.
If you treat it like a philosophy.
Practicing is hard.
Okay. So what are some of your practices on a daily basis?
Well, you saw me with my beads, and these represent, there's a lot of numbers like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Six Perfections. Well, we have what we call 108 delusions or things about us that we need to get rid of. We need to improve and get rid of those things, say hatred and greed, anger. So when I hold my beads, and we have, in our tradition, not all of them have these little tassels at the end, but this would be sort of our head, our arms, and our feet. So this is us, and these are the things that we need to work on. And when I rub them together and move them away, these are the things I'm trying to work on and get rid of. So every morning I will take my beads, and we have a home altar, and you will show us an altar in a second.
Yeah,
and
I'll bring that up after.
So we recite 2 or 4 chapters every day, morning and evening, from our prayer book, which is just selections from the Lotus Sutra. And so I will bow before the altar, and every morning I have to put offerings. I'm supposed to put offerings on the altar: fresh water, fresh tea or coffee, a beverage, and fresh food. And this is not as an offer, it's really out of gratitude for all that we get from the Buddha, from the universe, without even doing anything.
When I'm kind of breaking in, but when you say from the Buddha, is the Buddha then, so Siddhartha Gautama was a Buddha, and in a sense the Buddha, but there were many Buddhas before.
And many Buddhas after.
And so when you say the Buddha, is it something that's a reality in the universe that's greater than any person, or what?
Right. I mean, we think of it, we call it the great life force, but we can also call it, that's the typical term that we use, really.
The great life.
When Shakyamuni...
Is it personal, or is it an impersonal force that permeates life?
Yes.
Is it very similar to the Brahman in Hinduism and Hindu thought, that, kind of the ocean, everything is, the reality of the universe is spiritual, or not?
It's very close to that. I would think that's probably the closest, but it's as if, as I said, everything in the universe is connected and interrelated. And one of the things Buddha became enlightened to was that he was connected to this divine life force. And if he was, then we
everything
all are.
Is. Okay.
Yes, all living beings, correct.
Okay. Sorry for getting you off track. So you offer out of thankfulness to the Buddha.
Out of gratitude for, we're given these things every day without even, we're fed and given all of this without even asking. So it's a way of saying thank you.
So that's part of the beginning of the day?
Beginning of the day.
And then what else?
I do my sutra recitation. We do have incense. We light incense. I put fresh flowers every day on the altar. Again, that's just, to make it beautiful, to make it smell good, look good.
So this is an altar. You think this one is in the New York?
That looks like the New York church. Yes.
Okay.
And that would be our mother church. That's why it looks familiar.
Yeah.
So there's the 3 offerings. There's the fresh rice,
Fruit?
Water, rice, and probably tea,
Okay,
green tea.
the fruit is just there, or is that
This is most likely a special
a day?
occasion.
And these are the flowers?
Yes.
I don't see incense is
This is our incense bowl.
right here. Okay. Great. And then here's a standing
There's
Buddha.
Shakyamuni Buddha, yes. And these are the plaques for our ancestors and for the founder and co-founder. There's founder and there's co-founder.
Okay.
So I don't have at home.
Yours is much simpler than
It's
that.
yeah, it's very.
Well, this is this is what a piece of artwork.
Oh, they
right?
are. It's gorgeous.
Is that jade or is that?
No, it's bronze.
Bronze. Okay. But you have a standing Buddha at home. I think I've seen a picture
I do.
of.
Right. It's
Okay.
about that tall.
And then you have pictures of your ancestors.
I have the ancestor plaque and the founder co-founder plaque. Yeah.
Okay.
And then at a regular center, you would have the person leading the service, someone doing the gong, someone doing the wooden block, and if it was really, then you might have someone doing the taiko drum.
And what are those used for in the service?
The gong, we can kind of think of that as, so I'm going back to the Catholic Church when they would ring
the
chime.
bell.
It was just sort of a way for people, say
To
if they
pay
were way in
attention.
the back, they would know, okay, that
It's
means
time
we
to start.
finished that section, we're going
okay.
to the next. And the wooden block keeps the beat when we say the Namu Myoho Renge Kyo 10 times,
Okay.
right towards the end. So it's sort of it's almost like the band.
Okay. All right. Right now, you are not having worship or meditation services in person.
No, we cannot. No, we rent space from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fort Myers, and they do not anticipate opening this year.
Yeah.
Things, may change, but right now that doesn't look. So we've been Zooming since March, so I can also give
That would be
you
great.
the information.
Yeah.
We Zoom on Sundays right now with New York, although that may eventually fade out if they do open up. But again, that's
You might
all.
want to still Zoom with them anyways, or
Yeah, I'm sure we
Facebook
will.
live stream with them.
But
or
then we
something.
Zoom on ourselves Tuesdays and Thursdays. so-
Okay. Yeah, if you could send the times of those, because one of the projects you all have is a field trip, and this year we're going to have to do it virtually, possibly. Sure. But where you, and I'm hoping some of them will make a video of it. So like they could record potentially some of the Zoom and then create a video to share with the class and their experience of it.
Okay, that'd
Okay.
be fine. We'd love to. Love to have.
So what have I not asked you that I should be asking you?
There's one more thing, because we talked about the causes and conditions, and that is what we call in Buddhism dependent origination. But there's another important Buddhist principle, and this again goes through all the traditions, called the 3 seals of the Dharma. And so there's 3 things. First one is all things are impermanent. Everything is subject to change. And I think if you think that through, you'll see that that's
Right.
quite
Even
true.
Heraclitus even said that, one of the Greek philosophers, that all is flux. You can't enter the same river twice.
Correct. Then nothing has an ego or non-self. And this is maybe one of the harder ones of the 3.
The anatman, which is the non-self. So that I am not really
Right, we tend to
me.
think of ourselves as separate from others, and we're saying, no, this is just a physical representation that we're seeing, but our physical senses can be tricky, that our real essence isn't this physical self. It's that eternal, that Buddha nature that we have, that's our true self.
Okay. And then the third one?
Nirvana is quiescence. So a lot of people think nirvana is something like heaven, it's some other world,
Or
other
disembodied
place,
place.
or afterlife.
Yeah.
And really, Buddha wanted us to know that nirvana can be here, it can be now. But what it means is being able, again, cherishing every encounter. If you can cherish every encounter, you're not going to get agitated. You're not going to get upset. And when you can accept everything that happens to you calmly, with equanimity, then you have nirvana.
Okay.
But that's hard.
So for you then, Mary, when instead of, after you would pass away in this life, what do you anticipate?
Again, Buddha was not real definite about the afterlife. He was asked many times, and he kind of said, we don't know. But
Nobody, yeah.
But from his Hindu tradition that he grew up in, it was felt that you had afterlives. So, you went through that cycle of that samsaric life. What he tried to teach through the Four Noble Truths was you could break out of that samsaric life and get nirvana.
Which is, would you then be reborn into another physical life, or would you just be outside of?
Well, it's felt when you actually reach the level of nirvana, then you are beyond all of that. But as a bodhisattva, now we complicate that because we make a vow as a bodhisattva to come back anyway until everyone is liberated.
And that in the diamond, or in the Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama is
correct.
That reincarnation of until everyone is enlightened. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. That's their understanding.
Right.
Okay.
So we don't know if we're going to come back or not, but the feeling is if you live your life properly now, because with the law of karma, that good deeds will produce good effects and bad deeds will produce bad effects. If you have good karma as you live this life and leave it, if you do come back, you will come back with good karmic, let's say, merits.
Moving in that direction.
Yeah, and that will start you off in a better place.
So there are quite a few questions, I guess, that the Buddha never really speculated on.
He was
correct?
very scientific in many ways. He wouldn't speculate on things he couldn't prove or see.
Where everything came from, like the origin of the universe, or life, correct? And or the destiny of the universe or this life, in one sense of like afterlife type stuff, right?
Yeah, he said
those things don't
concern yourself with that.
Those things.
Just concern yourself with
focus
living properly now, and everything else will fall into place.
All right.
Which can be, difficult for some people to accept, or if you want to believe and be assured that when you pass on, you're going to go to a heavenly place, or if you haven't led a proper life, you're going to go to a place of punishment.
Yeah.
That's not part of what he's saying.
Great. Well, this is a beautiful picture, and so this may be where you've been Zooming with, you think?
Yeah, this is where we Zoom on Sundays. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much,
Thank
Mary.
you.
It's been
Good
great
luck
having
to all
you.
of you.
Yes, it's a fun class. It's just kind of an introduction to all the major
That's wonderful.
faiths, but it's good to kind of explore and understand other people's perspectives.
Absolutely, and that's another thing I think our Buddhism. We don't feel that we are the only true path. I mean, we believe that there are many paths for different people. So again, whatever path resonates with you, you go with that.